I'm Carolyn from Consultus Care Nursing. Today I'm joined by Kieran Robertson. Kieran is a SOLLA accredited later life advisor, and he's going to be answering some of the questions you might have about funding later life care. Welcome, Kieran.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good to be here.
Okay, so what is SOLLA?
SOLLA is the Society of Later Life Advisors. They were established in 2008 and effectively to act as a conduit between people seeking later life advice and advisors like myself that provide it.
And so what does it mean to be a member?
I think for me, when I first got involved in the later life arena, it was something that I aspired to, and I think it's helped me stand out from peers, and also means that I'm recognised for the work I do in the later life area.
So if I was looking at funding later life care, where should I start?
They need to establish what sort of care they're looking at. Is it going to be at home? Is it in a home? And really trying to get their ducks in a row, so to speak, so that they know whether or not it's affordable, and if it's not, what sort of shortfall they might be looking at.
Okay, so what sort of costs am I likely to be looking at?
Again, it will depend. It will depend on the type of care, where that care is, and of course, whereabouts in the country you might be. The average, according to research, cost of care on a weekly basis ranges from around £950 to £1,050 per week, depending on whether that's residential or nursing care, and domiciliary care is somewhere in the same region. But of course, in the southeast, you see that cost going up to probably more in the region of £1,350 to £1,550 a week.
Okay. And can I expect these costs to increase over time?
I would say definitely. I've spent many years talking to people about care fees, and I've always suggested they anticipate anywhere between a 5 and 10% increase in care costs each year just from inflation. I think with the events over the last few years, it's fair to expect those costs could be even greater, even if it's only for the short term. Aside from that, if someone's care needs change, that will, of course, or could, of course, incur higher additional cost. And I guess for those people that might be in a care home or looking to change care provider, that could also increase their costs.
So, Kieran, what state funding could be available to our clients?
There is state funding available, and it will be, again, it will depend on the type of care they might need. So most people that I speak to, one of the first things I ask them is whether they've had a what's known as a care needs assessment, and if they haven't, I encourage them to at least look into that. That's something that's done through the local authority, so you can ask them to carry out a care needs assessment. And what they're trying to do there is establish, firstly, whether someone does have care needs. Now, those care needs can fall into two different categories. It can be what they call social care needs, and that's sort of getting up, getting washed, getting dressed, things like that. And that falls under the remit of the local authority. But also there are what they call healthcare needs, things like behaviour, cognition, communication, and so on. And that would actually fall under the NHS. If you fall under the latter, and your primary need for care is a healthcare need, then you could be eligible for what's known as NHS continuing care. And that is for someone that will actually pay the full cost, could pay for the full cost of someone's care, irrespective of their individual assets, because it's non-means tested. If you don't qualify for full NHS continuing care, you might still be eligible for what's known as funded nursing care, and that is simply a contribution to your nursing care element of your care package. And if, of course, you don't have any healthcare needs and it's social care, then you would fall under the remit of the local authority. And of course, many people are not aware that the local authority, if you do have a care need, they are responsible to meet those needs. But there is a second part to that, and it's within available resources. And that's where the financial assessment comes in that most people are aware of on their capital. If you've got over £23,250, then you're expected to effectively self-fund that care or the cost of care. If you've got below that figure, but it's above £14,250, you're still expected to contribute towards your care using what's known as tariff income. And that's basically till that 23,250 becomes 14,250. Aside from that, the other sort of obvious state benefit to mention is what's called a tenant's allowance. And that is, again, a non-means tested, tax-free payment for those who require help or supervision, either during the day or during the night, or possibly during the day and during the night.
Okay, so if I was looking at living care, I might be a little biased, but personally feel that that would be the best option for my family and clients. Is that something that would still apply to living care?
In terms of NHS
Yeah.
continuing, yes, my understanding is that NHS continuing care, if you're eligible, could potentially fund the cost of care, whether that's at home or in a home.
So how do I calculate the cost of care?
When I first sit down with a client, as I said just now, one of the first things I want to establish is where they are financially, looking at their income, their expenditure, the assets that they have, and their liabilities. What I would suggest, first of all, is someone looks at what income they've got coming in from all sources. They might have some investment income, or even property income if they've got property that's rented out. And additionally, some people may have some state benefits that are coming in. Once you've got that figure together of what your total income is, and don't forget you need to be looking at the net income, not the gross, it's then a case of working out what the expenditure is likely to be. So what is the cost of care likely to be for you in your scenario? What is the cost of your existing living expenses? And are there any additional costs that you need to be factoring in? And once you've got those two figures, 9 times out of 10, you're looking at some sort of shortfall. And then, of course, it's looking at that shortfall and using the resources you have available, whether that's investments, property, pensions, etc., to help fund that shortfall, hopefully for the medium to long term.
Okay, and can I get any help towards the cost of this?
It's possible, depending again on your circumstances. State help might be available, so you could potentially get some assistance if you have social care needs through the local authority, or if they are healthcare needs, then through the NHS.
Okay, so am I looking at the finances of myself or am I looking at the finances of my father, for example?
So if it was your father going into care, no, what you should be doing is looking at his finances, and working out what's affordable to him. The reason I say that is because any state assistance, if it's from the local authority, will be based on his finances.
Okay, so what are my options with funding care?
There are actually 6 ways that people could potentially fund their own care costs, depending on whether or not they are living at home or moving into a home. But for instance, with a property, there is they could rent that property out. If they were moving out, going into a care home, they could obviously let that property.
So is that the same if I was going to look at living care?
No, obviously the property then couldn't be let out on it in its entirety, but there might be the option to get lodgers in, rent a room or two, because that would possibly bring in a bit more money. And of course, there might be the ability to use a deferred payment agreement through that, but you'd need to probably speak to your local authority about that, because they'd need to make sure that the numbers all fitted. And then thirdly, again, relating to the property, they might want to fund it via equity release. And that is, for those that are not aware, that's just where someone takes the equity or some of the equity in the home, and uses that money for whatever purpose they see fit. There are obviously costs involved in that sort of transaction, and the loan itself will attract interest over time. Obviously, savings, sticking money or using money in the bank or building society to meet the cost of care. Now, obviously, if you've got that sort of money in the bank, then you could literally set up a direct debit for whatever the shortfall amount is. And it's very simple to administer for most people. So whether that's the person going into care themselves or their deputies or their attorneys, a very sort of straightforward way to do it. But over the sort of medium to long term, I guess the obvious disadvantage to that over time is inflation. And as we've seen in recent years, inflation can definitely do some damage to sort of the actual the purchasing power of the cash that we've got in the bank. And then moving on from cash, if we're trying to maybe attempt to keep pace with inflation, we could look at investments. So that's where people would expose their money to perhaps the stock market or a range of different asset classes, fixed interest, property, and the stock market, to give them a more realistic chance of keeping pace with inflation. But of course, as we all know, what goes up can also go down, and there is what they call investment or volatility risk involved with that sort of transaction. So again, it has to be something that is suitable for the person involved. And then thirdly, for someone who doesn't want the inflationary risk and doesn't want to have that volatility involved in a transaction, there is also something called an immediate needs annuity or care fees annuity. And that, in simple terms, is an exchange of a lump sum in return for a guaranteed income for the rest of the recipient's life. On the plus side, that would give that person that certainty and security, knowing that their fees are covered for the rest of their lives. You can build in an inflation proofing to that to a certain extent. There are limits. And I guess the obvious downside is you could be handing over tens or even hundreds of thousands of pounds at the initial point. So it might take some time to break even, so to speak. But again, it's something that many clients of mine have done in the past for that security. Or of course, as well as each of those options individually, there could be a combination of two or more that you could put together for someone in a specific situation.
So there's quite a lot of options available, but what happens when the funding runs out?
If I'm sitting down with someone, that's probably one of the main concerns. It's not just about meeting the cost of care that's needed today. It's also making sure that, what I have will last usually for the rest of my life to meet those care costs. I think because of what's happened over recent years, we're expecting probably that to be higher, certainly for the short term. So you need to factor that into any sort of calculations you make. And a good advisor, if you sit down with them, they'll walk through those scenarios with you to work out, okay, well, if inflation did go up again to this sort of level, this is the impact it would have on your wealth. If care fees exceeded our expectations and went up, this is what could happen. We can't cover all bases. There are some unknowns out there. For instance, your care needs might change, your personal circumstances might change. There could be a whole host of things that happen. And that's where really, if you've got an advisor that can help you initially, they'll be the one you go to on an ongoing basis to make sure that that plan, whatever you've put in place, is as robust and as reliant as it can be.
So with regards to talking to people in the initial stages, do you find that they have any concerns about the inheritance? Because I know when I've spoken to my parents about it, there are often concerns about how that might affect the family.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, as you say, it's usually the worry comes from the parents, the ones who might need the care, because they had legacy plans. They wanted their children, their grandchildren, whoever, to inherit, the assets that they've built up over a lifetime. And yes, that's definitely a conversation we have. Rarely do I find that the children are actually worried about that inheritance. They're the ones that are looking at making sure mum, dad, or whoever it is are getting the best care they can. But yes, that's a definite conversation. For me, of course, the priority is making sure that the care that they are looking to obtain is firstly affordable and secondly sustainable over the medium to long term. But the sort of cherry on the cake, so to speak, is being able to help them also meet those legacy plans, whichever they might be.
So we've talked a lot about the sort of finance and the funding side of things, but what other obstacles can sort of be part of that initial process?
I guess the obvious one is if they're not ready to talk about it yet. The old saying about, people don't want to talk about death and taxes. I'm fortunate because I get to talk about death, taxes and care fees, and they're three topics that people rarely want to talk about, it usually comes about because they've experienced it. Someone they know has gone into care, or they've had a scare themselves, and it's become an obvious potential topic to talk about. If it's your parents or your loved ones that you're thinking of it on their behalf, I would say the absolute imperative thing to do would be to encourage them to put in place what's called a lasting power of attorney, because that will enable whoever you choose as your attorneys to act on your behalf should you be unable to do so in the future, i.e. if you've lost capacity.
Can that be a simple process?
It depends how you define simple. I would always advocate using a solicitor for something like that, because then you're getting all the advice you need and making sure the right boxes are ticked. For someone who doesn't want to or doesn't get round to doing that, if they then lose capacity and someone tries to act on their behalf, they would actually have to apply through the courts for what's known as a deputyship. And that process is known to be a lot more laborious, a lot more time consuming, and in most cases a lot more expensive.
So it's quite good to think ahead about that type of.
Absolutely.
Okay, Kieran, so if someone's not ready to talk to someone like yourself, what could they be doing in the meantime?
There's lots of information out there. There's obviously lots of websites that you can trawl through. For me, I usually suggest people use, there's Which, there's Citizens Advice is another good one, of course. And in terms of their resource sections, both Age UK and the Alzheimer's Society have some very good fact sheets on a range of different topics, whether that's state funding, local authority or NHS, right through to benefits such as attendance allowance and different ways to pay for care.
Okay. And where can I go to get further advice or to make contact with somebody like yourself?
I'm always going to advocate the use of a suitably qualified and experienced independent financial advisor, ideally someone who's a member of SOLLA, the Society of Later Life Advisors. And most advisors will offer an initial consultation, really to establish what it is, what your situation is at the moment, and where it is you are trying to get to. And they'll do that without cost or obligation. The reason is it makes sense to make sure, in my case, for example, that I can help someone before I start getting into chargeable work sort of areas.
Thank you, Kieran. It's been really interesting talking to you today and getting your input on things.
You're welcome.
How can people get in touch to find out more?
If they want to go on to the Society of Later Life Advisors website, SOLLA, there is actually a Find an Advisor page on there. They can put in their postcode and they will get a list of advisors in their local area. I'm obviously going to advocate the use of an independent advisor. Or of course, if they want to contact me directly, then the company is Autumn Financial Planning. That's autumnfinancialplanning.com, and we're in Tunbridge Wells.
Thank you, Kieran. We hope that you found this video helpful and that it's answered some of your questions about funding later life care. If you'd like to find out more about Consultus or are interested in arranging live-in care or live-in nursing for your family, please visit our website at consultuscare.com.